On the 13th day of July, in the year 100 before the Common Era, a young Roman patrician named Gaius Julius Caesar was captured by Cilician pirates off the coast of Pharmacusa, an event that would crystallize the ruthless ambition of Rome's future dictator. The 25-year-old nobleman, already fleeing political persecution under the dictator Sulla, found himself held for ransom in the azure waters of the Aegean Sea. But rather than cowering before his captors, Caesar instead mocked them for demanding a mere 20 talents of silver, insisting his worth was 50 talents. He laughed at their poetry, threatened to crucify them all, and treated his captivity as an inconvenient interruption to his destiny. This audacious response to kidnapping revealed the character of a man who would transform the Roman Republic into an autocratic empire, leaving a trail of civil bloodshed, political assassination, and constitutional destruction in his wake. Caesar's rise to absolute power would cost hundreds of thousands of lives, shatter the delicate balance of republican governance that had endured for nearly 5 centuries, and ultimately provoke his own brutal murder on the Senate floor. His ascent was neither accidental nor gradual. It was a calculated, relentless campaign that exploited every weakness in Rome's political structure. Born into the ancient patrician gens Julia in 100 before the Common Era, Caesar belonged to a family claiming descent from the goddess Venus herself, yet one that had fallen into relative obscurity and financial struggle. His father had achieved only moderate political success before dying when Caesar was merely 16 years old. The young Caesar grew up in the Suburra, one of Rome's most crowded and disreputable neighborhoods, far removed from the palatial estates atop the Palatine Hill where Rome's true elite resided. This childhood amid the urban poor would later inform his populist political strategy, giving him insight into the frustrations of Rome's plebeian masses. The political landscape Caesar inherited was fractured and violent. Rome in the late 2nd and early 1st centuries before the Common Era had witnessed the populist reforms and subsequent murders of the Gracchi brothers, the social war against Rome's Italian allies, and the devastating conflict between the conservative optimates led by Sulla and the populares faction championed by Marius Caesar's uncle by marriage. When Sulla seized Rome through military force in 82 before the Common Era and instituted his prescriptions, thousands of Roman citizens were murdered, their property confiscated, their families destroyed. Caesar himself was targeted for execution due to his familial connections to Marius and his refusal to divorce his wife Cornelia, daughter of Marius's ally Cinna. According to historian Adrian Goldsworthy in his comprehensive biography, Caesar, Life of a Colossus, only the intervention of influential friends and family members, including the Vestal Virgins, saved the young Caesar from Sulla's death lists, yet Sulla's ominous warning would prove prophetic in that young man. There are many Mariuses. The dictator recognized the dangerous ambition lurking behind Caesar's aristocratic features and penetrating dark eyes. After securing his ransom through borrowed funds, Caesar made good on his promise to the pirates. He raised a small fleet, returned to Pharmacusa, captured his former captors, and ordered them crucified along the shoreline, though he mercifully had their throats cut first, a gesture he considered generous for men who had treated him reasonably well during captivity. This combination of charm, gratitude, and absolute ruthlessness would characterize his entire career. The incident established a pattern. Caesar would transform every setback into opportunity, every humiliation into leverage, every enemy into a stepping stone. He was returning to Rome with clear vision. The Republic's oligarchic system concentrated power among a conservative senatorial elite who jealously guarded their privileges while millions of Roman citizens and subjects lived in poverty or servitude. Caesar would exploit this fundamental injustice, positioning himself as champion of the people while systematically dismantling the constitutional safeguards designed to prevent precisely such a demagogue from achieving absolute power. Caesar's methodology for accumulating power exploited the Republic's most dangerous vulnerability, the massive gap between constitutional theory and political reality. By the 60s before the Common Era, Rome's governmental system had become a hollow shell, with traditional checks and balances routinely circumvented by ambitious men wielding military force, popular support, or both. Caesar studied these precedents carefully, learning from both their successes and failures. Sulla had demonstrated that an army could seize Rome itself. Marius had shown that military reform and popular appeal could elevate a new man without aristocratic connections to unprecedented heights. Pompey the Great had proven that spectacular military victories could translate into political dominance. Caesar would synthesize all these lessons into a comprehensive strategy for domination. His early career followed the traditional cursus honorum, the ladder of magistracies, expected of ambitious Roman nobles, but with characteristic extravagance and popular pandering. Edile in 65, before the Common Era. Caesar staged gladiatorial games of unprecedented magnificence, featuring 320 pairs of gladiators equipped with silver armor. The spectacle plunged him deeper into debt, but won him enormous popular goodwill among Rome's plebeian voters. He borrowed recklessly, understanding that creditors would never move against a man whose political ascent promised eventual repayment from the spoils of provincial governorship. The year 63 before the Common Era brought Caesar to the position of Pontifex Maximus, chief priest of the Roman state religion, through a campaign marked by spectacular bribery. His debts had grown so enormous that he reportedly told his mother on the morning of the election that he would return as Pontifex Maximus or not. Return at all, exile being preferable to the humiliation of bankruptcy and political failure. His victory against two far more senior and distinguished candidates shocked the conservative establishment and demonstrated that traditional hierarchies could be overturned through bold manipulation of popular assemblies. As praetor in 62 before the Common Era, Caesar began positioning himself as defender of populist causes while carefully cultivating relationships with Rome's true power brokers. His affair with Servilia, half-sister of his future assassin Marcus Brutus, gave him insight into the inner workings of the Optimates faction. His political alliance with Marcus Licinius Crassus, Rome's wealthiest citizen, provided the financial backing necessary to sustain his expensive political operations. And his careful courtship of Gnaeus Pompeius, Magnus Pompey, the Great, created the foundation for the political arrangement that would shatter the Republic. The so-called First Triumvirate, formed in 60 before the Common Era, was not an official institution, but a private agreement among three men to dominate Roman politics through mutual support. Caesar, Crassus, and Pompey effectively bypassed the Senate and traditional constitutional procedures, using their combined resources, popularity, and military credentials to impose their will on the state. Caesar secured the consulship for 59 before the Common Era through this arrangement, then ruthlessly employed violence and intimidation to force through legislation beneficial to his partner's veteran land grants for Pompey's soldiers and tax relief for Crassus's business associates, while securing for himself the governorship of Gaul, a position that would provide both military glory and enormous wealth. The Senate's conservative faction watched in horror as constitutional norms collapsed. Marcus Porcius, Cato the Younger, the moral conscience of the Optimates, engaged in filibustering so extreme that Caesar had him physically arrested and removed from the Senate House. Caesar's fellow consul, Marcus Calpurnius Bibulus, attempted to obstruct legislation through religious means, declaring every remaining day of the year as a festival period during which no public business could be conducted. Caesar simply ignored him. Bibulus retreated to his home, issuing feudal proclamations while Romans joked that the consulship was held by Julius and Caesar rather than Caesar and Bibulus. The machinery of the Republic continued operating, but Caesar had demonstrated it was merely theatrical. Real power resided with those who commanded armies, controlled wealth, and commanded popular loyalty. Caesar possessed all three in increasing measure. The stage was set for the Gallic conquest that would provide him with a veteran army fanatically loyal to their general and army that would eventually march on Rome itself. Between 58 and 50, before the Common Era, Caesar's campaigns in Gaul transformed him from a clever politician into a military genius, commanding battle-hardened legions personally. Devoted to him, but at a cost measured in hundreds of thousands of lives. The conquest of Gaul represented systematic warfare of annihilation, ethnic cleansing, and enslavement on a scale that shocked even Romans accustomed to imperial brutality. Caesar's own commentaries, written with deceptive clarity and propagandistic purpose, in his commentary De Bello Gallico, documented campaigns that killed an estimated 1 million Gauls and enslaved another million, though ancient population statistics remain uncertain. The pretext for intervention was Rome's alliance with the Gallic Aedui tribe, threatened by the migration of the Helvetii. But Caesar's true motivation was transparent: military glory, wealth from plunder and slave sales, and the creation of a personal army that would ensure his political survival when his governorship expired. The Roman constitution prohibited generals from bringing armies into Italy proper, recognizing that armed force and republican governance were fundamentally incompatible. Caesar needed victories so spectacular and soldiers so personally loyal that he could defy this prohibition with impunity. The campaigns escalated rapidly in scope and savagery. The Helvetii migration was violently terminated, with over 200,000 migrants killed or forced back to their burned homelands to serve as a buffer against Germanic tribes. The Germanic chieftain, Ariovistus, despite holding the title friend of the Roman people, was attacked and driven back across the Rhine when his presence threatened Roman dominance. The Belgic tribes of northern Gaul were systematically subdued through a combination of military defeat and calculated terror. The siege of the Atritucci fortress in 57 before the Common Era exemplified Caesar's methods. After accepting the tribe's surrender, he sold the entire population, 53,000 people, into slavery when a subsequent resistance emerged. Whole communities were obliterated for daring to resist Roman domination. The Nervi tribe, known for their fierce independence and military prowess, was nearly exterminated in a single catastrophic battle where Caesar's legions killed or enslaved virtually the entire male warrior population. Caesar's two expeditions to Britain in 55 and 54 before the Common Era served primarily as propaganda spectacles. He led Roman armies across the ocean, the mythical boundary of the known world, returning with hostages, tribute agreements, and exaggerated accounts of the mysterious island's wealth and customs. The military achievements were minimal, but the psychological impact in Rome was profound. Caesar's dispatches were read aloud in the Forum, declared public holidays, and transformed him into a figure of legendary status. The darkest episode came during the Great Gallic Revolt of 52 before the Common Era, when most of Gaul united under the Arvernian chieftain, Vercingetorix, in a desperate attempt to expel the Roman invaders. The rebellion was sophisticated and initially successful, employing scorched earth tactics to deny Caesar's legions supplies. But Caesar's response was characteristically ruthless. At Avaricum, after a lengthy siege, his soldiers massacred virtually the entire population of 40,000 in revenge for the hardships of the campaign. The systematic slaughter took hours, with Roman legionaries methodically hunting down men, women, and children through the burning city. The revolt ended at Alesia, where Caesar constructed elaborate siege fortifications trapping Vercingetorix's army inside the hill fort, while simultaneously defending against a massive Gallic relief force. The engineering was brilliant. The human cost was staggering. When the relief army was defeated and Vercingetorix surrendered to prevent the starvation of his followers, Caesar had him imprisoned for 6 years before publicly strangling him during his triumph celebration in Rome. Gaul was pacified, but the word masked genocide and enslavement. The region's population was devastated, its tribal structures destroyed, its resources systematically plundered to pay Caesar's soldiers and political debts. Caesar emerged from the Gallic Wars with 8 veteran legions, who had enriched themselves through plunder and identified their commander as the source of their success. These legionaries owed more loyalty to Caesar personally than to the Roman stata, fundamental inversion of republican principles that would prove catastrophic for constitutional government. By 49, before the Common Era, the Roman Republic faced a constitutional crisis unprecedented in its history. A proconsul with a victorious army, enormous wealth, and popular support confronting a Senate determined to strip him of power and prosecute him for alleged illegalities during his consulship. The breakdown of the First Triumvirate, Crassus killed fighting the Parthians in 53 before the Common Era. Pompey, increasingly aligned with the conservative Senate, left Caesar isolated and vulnerable. His governorship was expiring, and waiting at Rome were political enemies who would immediately prosecute him once he lost the legal immunity his office provided. Caesar's counterproposal was simple: allow him to stand for consul in absentia while retaining his army, or permit everyone to disarm simultaneously. The Senate, manipulated by his implacable enemy Marcus Porcius, Cato the Younger, refused all compromises. On the 7th day of January in 49 before the Common Era, the Senate passed the Senatus Consultum Ultimate decree effectively, declaring martial law and instructing magistrates to ensure the Republic suffered no harm. The message was unambiguous. Caesar must disband his army or be declared an enemy of the state. Caesar understood that disbanding his legions meant political destruction, financial ruin, and possible execution. On the night of the 10th or 11th of January, the exact date remains debated, he led a single legion, the 13th, across the Rubicon River, the boundary between his province of Cisalpine Gaul and Italy proper. Ancient sources record his words as iacta alia est, the die is cast, though this may be later embellishment. The act was treason, a military invasion of the Roman heartland, and the beginning of civil war. The invasion caught the Senate unprepared. Caesar's legendary speed, his celeritas allowed him to secure most of Italy within weeks. Towns opened their gates without resistance. Pompey, appointed by the Senate to defend the Republic, had boasted he needed merely stamp his foot and legions would appear, but the reality was different. His veteran soldiers were demobilized and scattered. Caesar's approaching army was battle-hardened, enriched by Gallic plunder, and personally devoted to their commander. Pompey evacuated Rome, then Italy itself, retreating to Greece to gather forces from Rome's eastern provinces. Caesar pursued relentlessly. The war spread across the Mediterranean's plain, Greece, North Africa, Egypt as the two factions fought for control of Rome's vast empire. At Pharsalus in Thessaly, on the 9th day of August in 48, before the Common Era, Caesar's outnumbered legions shattered Pompey's larger army through tactical brilliance and his veterans' superior discipline. Pompey fled to Egypt seeking sanctuary, but was murdered on the shore by advisors to the boy king Ptolemy the 13th, who hoped to curry favor with the victor. Caesar reportedly wept upon receiving Pompey's severed head, though whether from genuine grief or theatrical display remains debated. The civil war killed tens of thousands of Roman citizens in direct combat, but the greater damage was political and social. Caesar's march on Rome established that military force trumped constitutional authority. His clementia, the famous clemency by which he pardoned defeated enemies, was itself a demonstration of autocratic power. Since only a monarch grants mercy while a republic prosecutes according to law, the Senate continued to meet, but as a ceremonial body rubber-stamping the victor's decisions. Caesar's enemies continued fighting under Pompey's sons and the die-hard Republicans who fled to North Africa. The battles at Thapsus in 46 before the Common Era and Munda in 45 before the Common Era were extraordinarily brutal, with Caesar's veterans slaughtering fellow Roman citizens who refused to accept his supremacy. At Thapsus, the massacre was so extensive that even Caesar's own officers seemed unable to control their troops' bloodlust. Cato the Younger, the embodiment of republican virtue, committed suicide at Utica rather than accept Caesar's mercy, becoming in death the symbol of the Republic's last true defenders. The civil wars were over, but the Republic was dead, replaced by the dictatorship of a single man who held every major office simultaneously, commanded all armies, and faced no institutional constraints on his power. Julius Caesar returned to Rome in 45 before the Common Era as absolute master of the Mediterranean world, accumulating titles and powers that shattered every republican precedent. He was appointed dictator, perpetuit, in perpetuity, transforming what had been an emergency magistracy limited to 6 months into a permanent autocracy. He held the consulship, the tribunician sacrosanctity that made his person inviolable, the title imperator as a permanent praenomen, and the pontifex maximus position that gave him supreme religious authority. Statues of Caesar appeared throughout Rome, some depicting him with divine attributes. The month of Quintilis was renamed Julius in his honor. His image appeared on coins while he yet lived, breaking the taboo against placing living Romans on currency. The constitutional forms of the Republic continued as hollow theater. The Senate met, but its membership was swollen with Caesar's appointees provincial elites. Former centurions and loyalists who owed their positions entirely to the dictator's patronage. Elections occurred, but Caesar's recommendations ensured predetermined outcomes. The popular assemblies voted, but only on measures Caesar approved. Every institution of republican governance had been reduced to an instrument of autocratic rule. Caesar's legislative program was characteristically ambitious. Reform of the calendar, colonial settlements for veterans, regulation of luxury expenditures, reduction of grain subsidies, and expansion of Roman citizenship. Some measures were genuinely beneficial, bringing order to chaotic systems. Others revealed the mindset of absolute power. Caesar even regulated the types of litters aristocratic women could ride. His planned campaigns against the Parthian Empire and the Dacians on the Danube frontier promised years of continuous warfare and expanding personal glory. But among the Senate's old aristocracy, resentment festered. The pardoned enemies who benefited from Caesar's clemency particularly resented their humiliation, forced to acknowledge they lived by his mercy rather than their rights as Roman citizens. Approximately 60 senators eventually joined the conspiracy to assassinate the dictator. Motivated by diverse reasons, genuine republican principle, personal ambition, wounded pride, and recognition that Caesar's lifetime dictatorship eliminated any path to traditional political success for ambitious men. The conspiracy centered on Marcus Junius Brutus, whose mother Servilia had been Caesar's longtime mistress, and Gaius Cassius Longinus, a capable military commander who felt his talents were undervalued. The conspirators called themselves the Liberatores, the liberators framing their planned assassination as tyrannicide. The virtuous murder of a despot threatening Roman freedom. They set the date for the Ides of March, the 15th day of March 44, before the Common Era, when Caesar would attend a Senate meeting before departing for the Parthian campaign. The assassination was chaotic and brutal. As Caesar took his seat, the conspirators surrounded him under pretense of petitioning. Tullius Cimber grabbed Caesar's toga, the signal for attack. The first dagger thrust came from Publius Cerilius Casca, striking Caesar in the neck or shoulder. Caesar fought back, stabbing Casca's arm with his stylus and attempting to flee, but the conspirators pressed close, stabbing repeatedly. Ancient sources claim 23 wounds, though only one proved immediately fatal. Caesar collapsed at the base of Pompey's statue, his blood staining the theater of Pompey's floor. The Liberatores had no plan beyond murder. They expected Romans to celebrate the tyrant's death and spontaneously restore the Republic. Instead, the city erupted in chaos. Marcus Antonius Mark Antony Czar's loyal lieutenant and co-consul seized the political initiative. At Caesar's funeral, he displayed the dictator's bloodied toga and read his will, which left gardens to the Roman people and money to each citizen. The crowd rioted, hunting the conspirators who fled into exile. Rome plunged into another round of civil wars, pitting Antonius and Caesar's adopted heir Octavian S. later, Augustus, against the assassins, and eventually against each other. The Republic the Liberatores hoped to save was already dead. Caesar's rise had demonstrated that republican institutions could not contain ambitious men commanding personal armies and popular loyalty. His assassination simply ensured that Rome's transformation into an autocratic empire would be completed by others, drenched in even more Roman blood. The constitutional government of the Roman Republic never returned.